Wuthering Waves is no stranger to dealing in mystery, and among one of the most mysterious introductions we've got to the story thus far is the addition of the Voice, an entity which seems to have foreknowledge of worldly events that spans across timelines and gives Yang guidance regarding things to come. While the number of clues that we have at hand to try and figure out who the Voice is are relatively low, there's a lot that we can deduce from the little that has already been said. Here, I'll attempt to cover who I believe the Voice is, what it represents, and what the ramifications for its existence are based on the events of Wuthering Waves 3.5. The biggest clue that we have regarding the Voice's identity happens at the end of the story, when Yang flat out asks it who it is.
Who are you? The echo of a passing breeze.
While this may seem like the writer's Christopher Vig posting on us again, it's actually a pretty meaningful reference to one of the foundational Taoist texts, the Zhuangzi. One passage from the Zhuangzi, which discusses the nature of Tao, more on what Tao is later, reads as follows.
The great clod belches out breath, and its name is the wind. So long as it doesn't come forth, nothing happens. But when it does, the 10,000 hollows begin crying wildly. Can't you hear them, long drawn out? In the mountain forests that lash and sway, there are huge trees 100 spans around with hollows and openings like noses, like mouths, like ears, like jugs, like cups, like mortars, like rifts, like ruts. They roar like waves, whistle like arrows, screech, gasp, cry, wail, moan, and howl. Those in the lead calling out, "Yee!" Those behind calling out, "Yoo!" In a gentle breeze, they answer faintly, but in a full gale, the chorus is gigantic. And when the fierce wind has passed on, all the hollows are empty again.
In this passage, the Taoist Zhuangzi likens the Tao to the wind. It is present at all times, and all things are simply echoes of its passing. This aligns with the Voice's claim that it's simply the echo of a passing breeze, but we see within it an omnipresence which also evokes the ubiquitous nature of wind as represented in the previous passage. Okay, so the Voice is the Tao, or some form of representation or reimagination of the Tao. Cool, but what is the Tao? Great question. Well, let's just crack open the first chapter of the foundational Taoist text, the Tao Te Ching, and take a gander.
The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name.
Well, that seems fairly what the hell are you talking about? Okay, so obviously I can't define the Tao. Not only am I just a random guilo, but as we can see in the opening verse of the Tao Te Ching, the Tao definitionally cannot be defined. In addition, what the Tao is has been the subject of debate amongst Taoist scholars since, well, the foundation of Taoism. That being said, I'm gonna try anyway. Tao as a word more broadly refers to a path or a way. To varying degrees, capitalism, Pastafarianism, and a keto diet could all be seen as types of Taos, and that they're paths or ways in which you can organize your life. They are not, however, the Tao, which is the subject of Taoism. This is why the opening sentence of the Tao Te Ching is a Tao that may be spoken is not the enduring Tao, and not the Tao that may be spoken is not the enduring Tao. There are many different Taos, but the Tao of Taoism is one that can neither be named or defined. So what is the Tao of Taoism? A common understanding of the Tao of Taoism is that it is the way in which nature and the universe is ordered. It's the flow of things from one to the next, the fundamental structure, order, and law that permeates all things. This further reinforces and reframes our understanding of the Voice as being a representation of the Tao, as it also seems to be aware of the underlying functioning of the world, as we can see here.
She was the first variable, a chaos system that broke this world from a determined chain of cause and effect.
The purpose of Taoism, then, is to act in accordance to the Tao. Because the Tao determines the way in which all things will proceed, the wise man of Taoism is someone who follows the flow in order to maximize the effect of their actions with minimal effort. Verse 37 of the Tao Te Ching reads as follows.
Tao abides in non-action. yet nothing is left undone.
Similarly, the Zhuangzi gives the parable of cook Ding.
A good cook changes his knife once a year because he cuts. A mediocre changes his knife once a month because he hacks. I've had this knife of mine for 19 years, and I've cut up thousands of oxen with it, and yet the blade is as good as though it had just come from the grindstone. There are spaces between the joints, and the blade of the knife has really no thickness. If you insert what has no thickness into such spaces, then there's plenty of room, more than enough for the blade to play about in. That's why after 19 years, the blade of my knife is still as good as when it first came from the grindstone.
These examples illustrate that the goal of Taoism is to act in accordance with the Tao, the fundamental laws and processes of the universe, because all things will naturally follow the Tao. Thus, fighting against it can only lead to inefficient or deleterious action. So, we've determined that the voice is likely a form of representation for the Tao, and that the Tao is, to some degree, the underlying way that the world is ordered, or in Wuthering Waves, the chain of causality. Now, what does this mean for us? Although the underlying theme of fighting against fate has been the core storytelling motif since 2.x, it's always been incorporated and discussed more nebulously, like a rebel fighting against the system or a child going against the wishes of their parents. In 3.5, however, the theme of Rover fighting against fate is portrayed as being something more consequential and kind of unnatural. When Rover interacts with the Prism of Fate during the fight against the Myriad Snare, we see Sheen say the following.
This was never meant for you to wield. Thus, I ask of you a vow. The moment you choose to defy the ordained course, you must be ready to bear the cost.
This indicates that, more than Rover just fighting against the powers that be, Rover is fighting against fate itself, and the threat of causality or predetermined outcomes. This is further supported by what the voice herself says to Yang Yang. Forgive us. We never intended for any living soul to hear this voice, for in every ending, not one has ever succeeded in saving anything. And later,
She was the first variable, a chaos system that broke this world from a determined chain of cause and effect.
when we take into account our understanding of the Tao, this clearly points to the idea that Rover's fight is not just vaguely against fate in the form of historical inertia or the will of people in power, but rather that there's a predestined ending to Solaris which Rover is attempting to defy. My personal theory is that this will come to be the reason why Rover has lost their memory. I believe that Rover was always meant to shepherd Solaris 3 to a specific predetermined ending, which was chosen by the Her civilization, or whatever civilization Rover ends up being from. But it was not an ending that they could personally accept, thus they chose to throw away all memory of their mission and their homeworld in order to change that ending. That's just what I think though. What do you guys believe will happen? Do you think I'm right? What or who do you personally hope the voice is? Sound off in the comments below and feel free to do all the YouTube stuff.